Hey everyone, my name is Utsab Saha, and I'm going to be demoing a Meteor app. So the name of this app is called Meteor underscore exploration. And yes, so why did I build this thing? It is really just my way of exploring Meteor and understanding how it works. I wanted to just build a CRUD app uh, and something that could support multiple pages. And yeah, so to do that, I created this to do app, and it's just really basic to do app. And let's see, yeah, one thing I was curious about with Meteor was I wanted to investigate its claims around its portability. So it claims that you can easily deploy to multiple platforms as a web application, as a mobile application, including iOS and Android. That seemed really awesome and powerful to me, and I wanted to play around with it to see, well, how easy is it to do that? Okay, so my strategies for learning. I basically went through a bunch of tutorials, and here are some of them. Uh, I first went through Meteor's like default tutorial on their website. That was okay for helping me get up and running, but it didn't quite um, help me understand what was going on. Um, this 17 episode playlist, the video thing, was pretty good for understanding more about what was going on. I found a couple of good ones for mobile apps. Um, the best one in the end, I found it at the very end, actually. I wish I found it sooner, but it was this book. Um, and what I liked about this book was it took you through it step by step, and it actually allowed you to fail. So it would have you try something which was not, you know, the final solution, and then it would say, yeah, it's, it's incomplete. We have to add this other thing to it. So that really helped me to understand why each piece was necessary. Okay. Where were we? So back to the demo overview. Okay, so we can do the demo now. It is running at localhost, and let me minimize that. So you can see it's a very basic CRUD app. We can add a new task, new, and you can refresh the page. It stores, it remembers your state. You can update it, mark it as complete. You can delete it, and it shows some summary information down there. Okay. So let's talk about the code. So I guess, first thing, let me talk about the stack. Meteor uses a Mongo database, and Mongo is interesting because it's very flexible. You can add and remove columns on the fly. You don't have to define this elaborate schema up front. It's interesting. I don't know whether it's a good or a bad thing. I could see advantages and disadvantages. I would say one really powerful thing about it is it's really good for beginners because they don't have to learn like the equivalent of active record for Rails. Um, they can just like get started and create a shitty database if they wanted to, but at least it works. Um, and then they have the next layer is Node. Node is what allows Meteor to run server-side JavaScript. And then finally, you have your client-side JavaScript and HTML, and it uses a template rendering system called Handlebars. Okay, so principles of Meteor. Let's talk about that. Um, it uses one language, JavaScript for the client and the server, and they can both be defined in the same file. So let me quickly show that. Let me open up Sublime. Okay, so you see there's three files here, the CSS, HTML, and the JavaScript. let me open them both up. Okay, so you see there's this if is client up here. All your client code runs there. And then you have your server up here if you have any server code. Um, I actually don't have any server code right now, but like, and I'll explain why that is later. Um, but it's really interesting. Like, what's powerful about this is your client side and your server side JavaScript can actually make use of the same functions. Like you see here, this to-dos collection is defined outside of the is client and outside of the is server, which means that both the server and the client can make use of that collection. I thought that was really cool. You get some interesting code reuse that way. Okay. Now, database is everywhere. So this is kind of why I don't have any server-side code. Your client side can have a copy of your database. So this to-dos collection, you'll see it's like this is kind of like the interface for interacting with the database, and you'll see this to-dos thing is it gets used throughout our client, like right here, todos.find. That's really interesting. So like I think it's cool because you kind of eliminate the need for you know, AJAX calls and post requests and that stuff. Okay, now you could, so actually, okay, there is stuff going on under the hood where Meteor is sending data over the wire, and it uses this protocol called DDP, which stands for Distributed Data Protocol. And all that means is that the client is making remote procedure calls to the server, and specifically the client is subscribing to a set of documents from the server. And the server's job is to keep the client updated whenever those documents change. So this is what's called like it's a reactive frame philosophy that Meteor espouses here. So every layer of the stack actually, from the server, the database, all the way to the client, is going to be reactive to changes to the data. Yeah. Now, I guess to answer that question of why do I not have any server code here, normally what would happen is like the server would perform some validations, like, you know, it would make sure that the user is logged in. You know, it would only expose certain parts of the database. Like this as is actually pretty insecure because somebody could conceivably go into the client and just like get all of the records in our database. I could actually show you that right here. If I go to the thing, open up the console, and I can do to-dos. So that's our collection. I can do todos.find and fetch. And this gives me literally like all the things in my database. So if there are other users, you could potentially see everyone's lists that way. So ideally, you would have some server code which will kind of do this, like validate that the user is, you know, logged in and only expose like the items corresponding to that user. Okay, so what else do we got here? So we can talk about the code a little bit more now, and let's go into that. Okay, so there are objects and helpers and stuff like that. So we have views, which are defined as templates in Meteor. So let's take a look at that. So let's look at our home page. So our entire home page is defined inside this template, which is called home. And you'll see this is mentioned in our router here. So we have a router which maps this guy, our root, to our template named home. Okay, now our home template, you'll notice that it includes another template. This syntax is the handlebar syntax for rendering a template, by the way. So there's a template called to-dos, which is right here. And to-dos then includes other templates. So one question you might be wondering is, where does the data come from? So here in to-dos, we're iterating over a list of to-dos. Where does that come from? So let's go back to our list here. So we'll see data comes from our JavaScript methods called helpers. So let's take a look at that. So the first thing to notice is the name of the template is important. It's going to correspond to a helper which references this name. So let's see, right here. So inside our client code, right, inside of ifmeteor.client, we have our helpers. So this helpers corresponds to the template which has the name to-dos. All that means is that the data is going to flow from this helper method to this template. And you'll see here, we're going to do to-dos.find, which returns all of the to-do list items in our database. And then this template is then going to be able to have access to those items. Okay. Anything else that's interesting here? I could show you event handlers. So what happens when we kind of hit enter here? Like, how is that working? So let's see where that happens. So that's gonna that whole form is included in this add to do template, which is right here. We see we got our form. It has an input element, text with name to do name. So we're going to see another block in our JavaScript which is going to handle that event. Helpers, add to do. We're looking for something called add to do helpers. Let's see, no, sorry, add to do events. And here we go right there. You see we got our event handler there, submit form, and it's just going to insert the thing right into our client-side copy of the database. Okay, great. So anything else for the code demo? I kind of talked about the routers. We're not going to do a live demo. Let's go back up. Okay, so let me talk about some of the challenges. Well, let me just talk about the strengths and weaknesses. So what I liked about Meteor was it has a really shallow learning curve. Because you're only using one language, JavaScript, like you don't have to learn a whole server-side language in addition to JavaScript. It also has very relaxed database schema rules, so that you don't need to learn the equivalent of active record. That took us like a whole, 2 weeks of constant, practice, and we still don't feel like we get it. And at least I don't. And now it's like I didn't even have to write any MongoDB schema stuff. And I'm sure there are disadvantages of that, but like, if the goal is just to create a rapid prototype, I think Meteor is really awesome for that. There's also no messy Ajax callbacks because of the reactive nature of Meteor. It kind of handles all that for you, so you don't need to learn Ajax either. That's crazy. Weaknesses. I will say it was kind of hard for me to get my head around the whole reactive thing. I don't know, like RESTful routes, is that a thing in Meteor? I don't know. And I'm not saying these are weaknesses per se, it's just unknown. I don't know. One thing that was a pain was kind of the lack of documentation, especially like Meteor didn't have routing out of the box. I had to look that up. And I think that's just because Meteor is very new. Um, one thing I definitely learned about how I learn, I think it was a mistake to try to learn, Cordova and PhoneGap. Um, like those are huge technologies in and of itself. If I were to do it over again, I probably would have just picked PhoneGap and just learned that for a few days and then tackled Meteor. But overall, yes, I would use Meteor again. I'm it seems really powerful. I think if I had to build a prototype in like a day, I would probably use Meteor. So maybe I'd use it at a hackathon or something, or like if I were working at a startup and I had to just get a prototype in front of a customer as soon as possible. Okay, that's all. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed.